everyone, both here in person and online. My name is Graham Kerridge, and I'm a member of the Queensland State Council of the Australian Institute of International Affairs. May I welcome you all here tonight for what I'm sure will be a very interesting presentation and discussion on the implications of the recent elections in Australia's close neighbour, Indonesia. I firstly wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're gathered for this event, the Turrbal and the Jagera people, and pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Secondly, I wish to thank and express appreciation to Holden Redlich for making available this meeting space for the events of the Institute. We are immensely grateful for their support. Tonight's event is a joint event with the University of Queensland and the Australian Indonesian Business Council. So we sincerely appreciate the partnership in bringing together this important discussion. Now, Indonesia, as you all know, is the fourth most populous nation in the world with over 275 million people. And it has, over the last 2 decades, emerged as a leading democratic power. Despite the challenges of its immense and diverse population and its complex socio-economic and political history, the peaceful democratic transitions that it has experienced over the last 2 decades have been a model for the world. The recent elections have, however, raised some questions as to not just the domestic and foreign policy implications of the election outcome, but also the implications for politics itself within Indonesia. To help us understand the elections and their implications, we're privileged to have a panel discussion by Dr. Ahmad Umar, a lecturer in the School of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Queensland, Ben Seumahu, a committee member of the Queensland chapter of the Australian Indonesian Business Council. The panel event will be moderated by Dr. Greta Nabbs-Keller, Associate Director of Defence, Space and National Security at UQ and Senior Research Affiliate of the UQ Centre of Policy Futures. The panel discussion will go on until about 6:40 p.m, after which there will be time for some questions from guests both here and online before we wrap up and close at about 7 p.m. Without further ado, I will hand it over to Greta to start the discussions.
Thank you very much, Graham, and welcome everyone. There's some familiar faces here, so there'll be some tough questions for our panellists, I'm sure. Thank you also to the Australian Institute of International Affairs Queensland, obviously the University of Queensland, my own university, and the AIBC, Australia Indonesia Business Council in Queensland. Just some introductory remarks before I introduce our 2 panellists tonight. World's 3rd largest democracy went to the polls on 14th of February to choose a new presidential team and legislative members in the largest single-day election contest in the world. Former military strongman Prabowo Subianto, who was paired with incumbent President Joko Widodo's 36-year-old son, Gibran Rakabuming Raka, has emerged as a clear victor in the quick count polls, easily surpassing the 50% threshold of votes to avoid a runoff, with official election results to be announced, I think, on March 20. However, developments during the election campaign have highlighted a trend towards authoritarianism and the rise of dynastic politics. These developments included a controversial constitutional court ruling led by Joko Widodo's brother-in-law, lowering the age threshold to run in a presidential contest below 40, which effectively enabled Jokowi's son Gibran to contest alongside Prabowo. Then there was Jokowi's departure from a convention of presidential neutrality when he appeared to endorse Prabowo and his son on a number of occasions. This was accompanied by allegations about the misuse of state funds for Prabowo Gibran's election campaign and wider spread election fraud, which is playing out in the media currently. The results also point to continuity, however, in President Widodo's economic policies. predicated upon substantive Chinese investment in infrastructure and extractive projects, an issue that has been contentious domestically on environmental, labour and economic grounds, but it's also raised concerns internationally that Indonesia is moving further into China's orbit. As strategic tensions rise in the Indo-Pacific region, analysts ponder also on whether a Prabowo presidency will augur a more assertive maritime posture in the South China Sea, or whether Indonesia's relatively anodyne approach to regional strategic challenges will continue. So let's introduce our panellists in turn. So firstly, I'd like to welcome Umar. Ahmad Umar is a lecturer at the School of Political Science and International Studies, Pulses at the University of Queensland, where he completed his PhD on the idea of Asia in world politics. He is an expert in Indonesia's foreign policy and Southeast Asian regionalism. He writes for several media outlets and academic journals, including the Lowy Institute's The Interpreter, Indonesia at Melbourne, the Jakarta Post, International Affairs, and the Canadian-based International Journal. Prior to his PhD, he worked as a researcher and executive secretary at the ASEAN Studies Centre, Universitas Gadjah Mada, Indonesia. So welcome, Umar. Next, I'd like to welcome Ben Seumahu, who co-leads the Indonesian focus of KPMG's Asian and International Markets business. Ben is of mixed Indonesian-Australian heritage. He's worked with the firm delivering professional services, including advisory and audit-related services to a wide range of industries, including agribusiness, financial services and energy and natural resources in both Australia and Indonesia, including as a secondment to the Indonesian firm. Ben is on the Queensland Committee of the Australian-Indonesia Business Council, which is focused on supporting businesses to further develop trade with Indonesia, and he assists in organising events. Ben is also a member of Basudara Maluku, a not-for-profit group focused on identifying and encouraging development in Eastern Indonesia. So a warm welcome to you, Ben Seumahu, and thank you for joining us. So Umar, around 150 million approximately Indonesians cast their ballot on Valentine's Day.
Yeah.
It's fair to say that the vote for Prabowo and Gibran was buoyed by both Jokowi's popularity and by younger voters who perhaps had little memory of Indonesia's authoritarian past under the Suharto regime. I'm just wondering, what, in your opinion, do the election results tell us about current Indonesian electoral sentiment and voter priorities?
Okay, thanks, Greta. So I think there are two major factors behind Prabowo's winning. First is that the voters clearly want the continuation of some Jokowi's programs, particularly the infrastructure development and also the extractive industrial downstreaming, which is part of the key issues in the election debates. And if you take a look at the geographical distributions of Prabowo's votes, Prabowo is winning in almost every province, especially in the eastern part of Indonesia and including in Java. So this is a combination of the Jokowi's popularity and then the sentiments, the populist sentiments that I think leads the voters, especially in rural eastern Indonesia and rural Java, to continue to vote for the continuations of Jokowi's programs in the future.
So why has Jokowi been so popular? I mean, that's about 76%
Yep.
popularity polls. I mean, they're figures that Australian politicians would
Yep.
only dream of. Why has he been so popular?
Yeah, I think because he was able to consolidate his power, not only in the strongholds of the PDIP, his party in Java, but also through certain programs directed to the rural part of the outer part of Java in Indonesia, which is partly driven by some Chinese investments in nickels, for example. It is clearly showing that Jokowi was actually perceived positively not only in Java, in the stronghold of his stronghold actually, but also in the rural part of Indonesia. And it was actually surprised that Prabowo was getting a lot of votes in Indonesia, which shows clearly Jokowi's popularity there.
He's a can-do figure, isn't he, in terms of infrastructure? We'll talk about that a little bit later. Now let's turn to Prabowo Subianto. He's currently the Defence Minister. A bit of a mixed record as Defence Minister, I would say. And in October, he's very likely, of course, to be inaugurated as Indonesia's 8th president. It's really interesting for those who are old enough, like myself, to remember Prabowo, during his military days and under the Suharto regime. But in this election campaign, he was cleverly marketed as Gemoy. He was kind of rebranded as a cute grandfatherly type of figure, and it's really extraordinary, isn't it? Given he was dismissed from the military. 1998, 1999, I can't remember the exact year. He's directly linked to the disappearance of around 13 activists, I think 23 in total. And while he was he was actually out of the commander of Kopassus, Army Special Forces at the time, and he's generally known to have quite an explosive temper. So how should people understand the man, Prabowo Subianto? How should we understand him as the next president?
So, I think Prabowo as a president could be very unpredictable. First, in the past 10 years, he was clearly positioning himself as the opposition figure until he was appointed by Jokowi as a Minister of Defense in 2019. But in many ways, Prabowo's personality is not easily predicted. First is because he has personal ambitions. He was the son, the then son-in-law of former President Widodo, and then he was rising through the military ranks during the last stage of the new order. So he was a man of the privilege during his time, and I think what he wants now with his rebranding, his getting the coalitions with Jokowi, he wants to clean up his past, where he was accused of human rights abuse, he was accused of the abducting activists, and he wants to make sure that he ends his political career in a nice way. So that's why I think it's a part of the deal when he's getting into coalition with Jokowi.
Yeah, I was actually looking at some of the figures out of the election and some of the analysis. Interesting, 52% of the voters were below 40 years old, 31% were below 30. The oldest of these young voters were about 15 years old during Indonesia's democratic transition in 1998. So I think, there's younger voters who either don't really understand this path or perhaps don't really care. And I guess the interesting thing is, just in your opinion, would Prabowo have been popular if he wasn't as paired with Gibran? That constitutional court decision was critical, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think before Prabowo selected Gibran as the vice presidential nominee, his electability rating was below 40%, which shows that he's not really popular. And I think the younger voters' sentiment is partly driven by the selection of Gibran as the vice presidential nominee. So I think Gibran's factor is playing a role here, and also it's not only Gibran, but also the popularity of Gibran's father, which is President Jokowi himself. So it shows that I think because Prabowo he's a rich person, so he managed to craft a deal with Jokowi in order to enter the politics in a smooth way. And clearly, I think part of this because Jokowi has no clear successor. So the Central Java governor, Ganjar Pranowo, who only got the 16% votes, was actually closer to Megawati than Jokowi. And this is something that I think part of them is a conflict between Jokowi and Megawati Soekarno Putri that leads to the to the election of Gibran as the vice president.
Sort of move from Ibu Megawati as the kingmaker to Jokowi to become the kingmaker. And I think that'll be picked up in the Q&A.
Yeah.
So Ben, we see very much a policy focus at the moment in Australia on economic relations with Southeast Asia. We've got Albanese, I think, has announced today, I think it was a new $2 billion Southeast Asia financing infrastructure facility, which mirrors what we've done in the Pacific, to an audience of business leaders at the Australia-ASEAN Special Summit in Sydney. So how were Indonesia's election results, which delivered Prabowo victory, viewed by the business community and perhaps in both countries?
Yeah, I think it's probably hard to make a generalisation, obviously, because everyone has different views, and probably there's political views and economic views. But I think overall, the result was looked at positively in the context of certainty and continuation, as Umar mentioned, of Jokowi's economic policies. I think that's sort of borne out a bit. The stock exchange, the Jakarta index went up the day after the election by 1%, and some of the ratings agencies have sort of taken a positive view and said that they expect growth will continue. So I think there's a general perception that, rightly or wrongly, that the policies will continue. And I think it's also just always we have talked that things are unknown, but there's always a fear of unknown and change. So if you had a candidate who was going to be nationalistic or restrict things, you'd have a different view. And I think, although most of the other candidates had similar policies, there was criticism of the omnibus labour law as a potential change, and also the other thing was in terms of the development of the Nusantara, the new capital city. One of the candidates was also against that. So I think the sense of stability and continuing on.
So sort of, I guess, in some way, the markets see this as continuity at the moment, until proven otherwise, possibly.
Yes,
there's a sentiment. So let's turn to the Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement, known as the IA, the CEPA, or the CEPA, or Comprehensive Economic Partnership. It was signed, if I'm not mistaken, by both governments in 2020. At least it was ratified then, around then. So can you explain what is the CEPA? What is it exactly? And to what extent have the goals of the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement being achieved during Jokowi's presidency?
Sure. So, Greta, you might remember before 2020, every year it was CEPA is going to come out. And I remember when I joined the AIBC, and I think you were there, every event was going to come out. So when it came out, eventually during COVID in 2020, it was good news. But I think the purpose is basically a complementary economic partnership, taking the strengths of Australia and Indonesia together. And then there were some very specific outcomes in relation to trade and certain specific industries that were made in relation to that. I think it's a good question in terms of have the goals of CEPA been achieved, and I think it depends on how you determine what success is, right? So it also depends on if you're looking from an Australia or Indonesian perspective. So if I take it from an Australian perspective, if you look at our exports, they're basically from pre-COVID to now have almost doubled to around $8 billion from Australia to Indonesia. Continued growth in agricultural exports. You've also seen, I guess from a partnership point of view, we've seen wheat increase, and Indomie and other people using the Australian product and exporting it out. So there's a degree of our helping out in that space. I think from CEPA as a whole, there has been some successes. Aspen Medical, you might have heard, made $1 billion investment into Indonesia, into private hospitals in Indonesia. Educational institutions like Monash and Central Queensland University have also opened up campuses and others in Indonesia. So we have seen some of those education and other objectives met. It's been interesting because with my business hat on, because I don't claim to be an economist or political scientist, but we have seen a bit of a role reversal with Indonesia investing into Australia. So in terms of mining, We had a Daro basically bought the Kestrel mine, just pre-COVID. We had your Golden Energy acquire the Stanmore mine. So we've seen inbound investment from Indonesia coming in. So I think all of those things sort of support that. But it's really interesting to talk about the success of IEPA. We were at an event with the ambassador about 2 weeks ago, and someone mentioned, should we change the rules to ICEPA? And he said, look, the rules are important, but what's more important is the people-to-people contact. And so I guess my experience has been that there is still quite a gap to go on the people-to-people front. So it's encouraging that Albanese's made the commitment today. And I guess the first week when Labor came in, he went to Indonesia. A few months later, there was a delegation of Australian superannuation funds that went, which all sounds positive. But we ran with Asia Link a series of briefings for ASX 50, top 50 companies and private companies. And the perception of Indonesia as corrupt, maybe a view of Indonesia from 20, 30 years ago around how difficult it was to do business is still there. So I think while a lot's been achieved, the people-to-people and the public perception needs to change in order to fully develop it. And the other thing, although I said export growth, Indonesia is still just outside the top 10 export markets, which it really should be, a lot higher. So it's growth, but still a long way to go, I think, in terms of success.
Yeah, I was reading just the other day about some criticisms, I think, from Indonesian analysts that Australian investors are too risk averse. They're too safe, and I think that there's more investment in New Zealand, if I'm not mistaken, than Indonesia. So we're kind of laggards in that respect. And we also, I mentioned about the ASEAN summit, but of course Nicholas Moore, that kind of seminal Southeast Asia strategy is certainly worth reading for those of you interested in the trade, investment, and economic relationships with Southeast Asia. So in terms of the economic policies of the Jokowi government, you mentioned a little bit about the Omnibus Law and IKN, the new capital city project in Kalimantan that some of you will know as Borneo. What economic policies of the Joko Widodo government, if continued, would have the most significant impact on the business relationship, in your opinion?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think what was mentioned is one of, Jokowi's major things has been this concept of downstream, right? So taking minerals, nickel in particular, and processing that in Indonesia. And so in 2020, they banned the export of unprocessed nickel from Indonesia. And that's had a significant impact because China has invested probably around $23 billion into the processing plants for nickel. A lot of them throughout Indonesia, but a significant input into that. And so we've seen that, and that hasn't necessarily been well received overseas because basically the nickel is then processed and goes into stainless steel production. From, a future electric vehicle point of view, the plan is to use some of that processed nickel to develop the industry in Indonesia. But I guess there's been a lot of criticism overseas, and from an Australian perspective, many of you might know that there's been talks and some nickel mines are closing in Australia because of the low price of nickel. And part of that is because of the huge production increases in Indonesia. So I think Indonesia was even taken to the World Trade Organization over it. So I think that's a policy that, depending where it goes, is obviously something that's going to impact the overall relationship.
I don't think Twiggy Forrest was too happy about it, was he? And see that China's played a key role there as an event in terms of the investment in nickel downstream processing and smelters, and it's quite contentious even on environmental grounds, I believe. We've got what's considered clean nickel production, what's considered kind of dirty, with environmental social governance costs
and the transition. And I just might give an alternative view, just to give you an example, is that some of you might know, but there's an ASX listed company, Nickel Industries, which started off with just a mine close in northern Sulawesi, and of course when the Indonesian government introduced new rules, it wasn't able to export. But what it did is enter into a partnership with some of the Chinese processing plants, and has basically expanded to like a $3.5 billion ASX listed entity off the back of, it's got the mine plus the processing plant in Indonesia. So there are at least some Australian investors who are benefiting from it. Maybe cynically there, but yeah, there is other things going on in the dynamic. Yeah.
I'm just diverting for a moment, but the downstream policy.
Yes,
I mean, do you see that in terms of a kind of protectionism or resource nationalism, or do you think, from the Indonesian government's perspective, it's a legitimate way of adding value to nickel production?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends where you sit. If you're a nickel producer in Australia, probably not. But no, I think obviously you're trying to increase. It's a form of nationalism because you're banning the export of the processed of nickel. But obviously you're trying to keep. Just as in Australia, we often complain that we export all of our raw material and it gets processed in other countries, and we buy their manufactured goods. It's the same thought that we should develop that, that internally, increase the value, as we said with China. So I think, I guess that there's a bit of that reliance on China as well in terms of demand. So there is, with that investment, there is a degree of, how's that going to impact in the future?
Interesting. So, Umar, I'll come back to you. So I mentioned the Australia-ASEAN Special Summit meeting in Sydney, where a lot of big issues are being discussed, including maritime security, but also economic fundamental of Australia's relationships with Southeast Asia. I also noted very quickly after Prabowo was elected that Deputy Prime Minister Miles and our Chief of Defence Force, Angus Campbell, flew to Jakarta very quickly, and their discussions on a treaty-level defence agreement, which is described, quote, the deepest and most significant defence cooperation package in history, unquote. So under Jokowi's presidency, however, Indonesian foreign policy, as I've mentioned before, has been criticised both internally and externally as far too passive, given the strategic challenges in the region and given Indonesia's traditional leadership role in ASEAN. So can we expect any change in Indonesia's diplomacy and defence posture, do you think?
So in terms of diplomacy, I think these are two interesting aspects. In terms of diplomacy, I would expect that Prabowo will play more personal role in foreign policy compared to Jokowi. First, because he's the former defense minister and he knows about geopolitics, and he also has a long-standing networks abroad, which I think, coupled to his personal ambitions, will lead him to play a more prominent role in foreign policy. But the question is that whether it will be translated into improvement of diplomatic capacities. This is something that we might need to see, especially with the election of who will be the foreign minister. So the gossip will be that the foreign minister, there are two candidates that I heard that will become the foreign minister, Dino Patijalal, who is close to the Susilo Yudhoyono and the Democratic Party, and Rosan Ruslani, the former ambassador of the United States. Both of them, Dino is interesting because he has a personal view of the foreign policy, and he might take a more important role in terms of diplomacy. But I'm not sure that he will be in line with Prabowo's eccentric approach to and personalizing approach to foreign policy. So we will need to see with this. But I think we might expect improvement in terms of the foreign policy, but not in the diplomatic capacity. In terms of defense, and I think Prabowo was clear since the campaign that he would improve the defense budget 2% from the GDP. But I'm not sure if it would be accepted by the new finance minister because of the ambitious projects like the free school meals. Also, it takes a lot of budget from the national budget, and I think what we might see is that the gradual improvement of the defense budget and also Indonesia's more active role in the defense and weapons procurement to meet the minimum essential forces, which is due by 2025, but I think it's still below the target. So I think this is something that Prabowo will take. And the question is that whether or not Prabowo will take a stronger role vis-a-vis the great powers, especially China and United States. I'm not sure that Prabowo will take a strong position against China like President Marcos, simply because of the Chinese investments, which is deeply entrenched in Indonesian development right now. So Indonesian relations with China might be still very well, but still be good. But I think Prabowo might want more improvement in relationship with the United States and Australia as well, especially to meet the defense modernization program. So it will be depending on who will be the foreign minister, and it will be depending on the development in the regional and in global politics. But Prabowo is very keen to improve the defense capacity, and he will likely to improve the defense budget.
You've covered a lot of ground there, so I'll just pick you up on a couple of things. That relationship with the US is an interesting one, isn't it? Prabowo was trained in, I think, Fort Bragg, if I'm not mistaken, in Special Forces, US Army Special Forces College. He has a long, enduring relationship with the US, but he was actually banned from the US, I think, from around 1991, 1992, or maybe for quite a long time.
Quite a long time,
so it's all been forgiven? Has he been redeemed, has he, in Washington's eye?
But I think he has a good terms with the US Defense Secretary right now, so it might forgive that, and he's pragmatic because he wants Indonesia to have a defense procurement with the US, to access US weapons. And this is partly the driver.
And you also mentioned about you don't think diplomatic capacity will improve. What do you mean by that? Well, you flagged that there would be a change in foreign minister, but you don't see diplomatic capacity improving.
So there might be no changes in how Indonesia would see international politics in general, and how Indonesia would play an active role in managing a crisis systematically in the region. For example, in the South China Sea, this is something that Prabowo he was, I think, he had questions in the campaign, and he has his answer about to resolve the crisis is not clear. And I think one of the interesting part of the Prabowo is that he's very skeptical with ASEAN. So he wants to engage with other countries in bilateral capacities and not by multilateral organizations. Even though I think multilateral organization is one of the key part of Indonesia's foreign policy. So I think in terms of this, there might be uncertainty. So we might expect that Prabowo will play a personalistic role in foreign policy, but not strengthening the capacity of the Indonesia's foreign ministry and then Indonesia's diplomatic capacity abroad, especially in multilateral organizations.
So you probably likely see a more confident figure on Indonesia's international stage, more reminiscent of Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono's time, more confident, fluent English speaker, multilingual, and perhaps taking a stronger role than Joko Widodo. I just want to pick up then on something that Umar mentioned there about Sri Mulyani, the finance minister. And my question is, would that generate some nervousness in investment circles? You've had a very steady hands. Sri Mulyani as finance minister, a former senior executive in the World Trade Organization. I think there's been some tensions with the defence minister and how much he can spend and not on procurement of French and other fighters, combat fighters. What do you think the markets will react to?
Yeah, so I think it was interesting in January this year, when there was rumours going around that she would resign in January.
Yes.
The market, so the rupiah actually fell, and foreign investors were selling their government bonds. So that was just on a rumour. So obviously she is a key part, and I think there is a bit of a contrast with, I think, the free lunch and milk is a great program, but they estimate the cost is like $29 billion US, and I thought, oh, that seems high, and I started doing my maths, and I thought, no, that's actually pretty realistic when you add up the significant young population in Indonesia. So balancing the budget, if she does resign or is replaced, who's going to take her is going to be a big impact.
Yes.
So as much as I talked about the business certainty, that is obviously an uncertainty that's still there. Yeah.
Can you explain the free lunch and milk matter for those who are not sure?
Umar might know.
What are you referring? I know what you're referring to. What are you referring to there?
For school children, one of the promises, the election promises, was obviously a very popular promise and an honourable thing to do, was to provide, free lunches to school-aged children and milk throughout Indonesia, which is a very big endeavour to do. So I'm not sure how that will pan out. Yes.
Did you want to comment on that, Umar?
So, yeah, this is a very popular policy proposal that Prabowo released during campaigns, and this is something that I think Joko is now preparing the next year's budget to include this, which is unusual because there's still no transitions to the new government. But this is something that I think Prabowo, this is a populist program, and the downside is that it might take a lot of budget, and Indonesia's fiscal capacity is not that strong to cover this, especially because Prabowo also wants to improve the defense capabilities with the and then it also takes a lot of national budget as well. So this is tensions.
Potential tensions and challenges for economic management there.
Yeah.
Can I just add something? Yeah, so there is a limit that Indonesia has on the deficit can be as a percentage of the GDP of 3%. So there is questions around with all this additional expenditure. I think during COVID they had a special exemption to go above 3%, but it would need, I think, for Congress to approve. Yeah.
Could we envisage a lifting of the deficit ceiling, or?
If it's a popular vote, then
it depends on who will be the finance minister. I'm not sure Sri Mulyani will approve this kind of ceiling because she doesn't like to put the proposal very early, but it will depend on how the new cabinet will negotiate these policies.
Okay, let's lastly, I think Ben and Umar, I'd be interested, before we go to Q&A, I'd be interested to hear what are your key takeaways or predictions on Indonesia's domestic and foreign policy outlook under a Prabowo Gibran presidential team, and what might it mean for Australia? So I'll turn to you first, Ben.
Yeah, I guess I might focus more on the economic side, but I think on the optimistic side, Indonesia has a young population. It's got currently high economic growth. It's got a lot of resources. So there is a lot of positive things that are there. But obviously there are challenges ahead. One of those would be climate change. And one of the proposals going forward, obviously with the young population under 30, there's going to be a lot of focus on moving to a green economy and pressure to move Indonesia in that way. So I do see that's something that will impact, and maybe there's opportunities for Australia. Australia and Indonesia have signed various joint memorandums to help Indonesia move from like a coal-based economy to move to decarbonise. So as we do that in Australia, I think those are some things that will be important going forward. I think to the extent that the current policies are continued, there'll be opportunities for Australia in terms of investment and infrastructure too.
That was indeed an important policy plank of the Albanese government, wasn't for the election. It is basically mainstreaming climate change cooperation into our relationships with Southeast Asia. And I think there's a climate change infrastructure partnership, bilateral climate change infrastructure partnership. And there's a lot of complementarities there. What are some of the risks that you see, Ben? Can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably in terms of the risks, there's the unknown of Prabowo, and I guess how that relationship will work at a political level and business level. So we're assuming that things will play out in accordance with the current Jokowi, policies. I talked about the downstreaming and potential negative impacts for Australia. How's that going to work out? And I think the shift from China to other countries as investors is, again, it's an opportunity as well as a challenge for Australia. Can we take a part of that investment?
Umar, over to you. What are your key takeaways for discussion?
So I think the new president and the new government will be heavy on defense and security, and I think the fact that Richard Moss has coming to Jakarta and then to talk about the treaty shows that I think the new government would be keen to improve the security and defense relationship with Australia, which I think is already strong. Jokowi has established some partnerships and initiatives, which is strong, and then it will be further improved, I think, during Prabowo. In terms of economy, this is, I think, the problem is that Australia is not Indonesia's biggest trade partners. So this is something that there might be some push to improve this further, but I think it will be a business as usual. But I think it means that Indonesia's bilateral relationship with Australia will be stronger, but it doesn't mean that Australia can push the agenda to Indonesia in terms of Indonesia's regional leadership in ASEAN, for example. We might expect that Indonesia will weaken the leadership a little bit. It will be depending on how Prabowo will manage the relationship with other countries. And Indonesia's relationship with China will be stronger as well, especially in economy. But we'll see, because the South China's negotiation is still underway. That will be 2026, and there are tensions now with the Philippines, and it will be likely to affect Indonesia's relationship with China in general. But as long as China has a commitment with investments, and it will be the relationship will be stronger. And this is something that I think Australia can deal with by utilizing the existing bilateral channels while respecting the sovereignty and then the autonomy of that Indonesia wants with the relationship with China.
Okay, I might turn to the audience firstly for a question before we go to our online audience. Do we have a question? Yes.
I have two short questions that kind of focus on domestic politics. Thank you both for your presentation, very interesting. So I wanted to ask about Jokowi's support for Prabowo through Gibran, which both of you spoke about. How is that perceived in Indonesia as such? Because I think that, as you've indicated, I think that kind of could indicate a return to sort of more dynastic politics, like Sukarno and Suharto style. And I was wondering how that is perceived, and if there are any kind of class divisions in terms of the perception. Do sort of lower class people see that more positively than more educated people? And then the second question would be, considering Prabowo's background in the military, do you foresee any kind of change in governance approach towards West Papua?
Okay, I'll start with you, Umar, there.
Okay, so so I think clearly dynastic politics is it was an issue in the campaign. There was push to from academics and civil society to criticize this aspect, but it turns out that it wasn't eventuated in the ballot. Still, I think it's not because of the class, because if we take a look at the recent poll survey from the indicator, even the educated people choose Prabowo because they want to continue the stability that Jokowi had in the new government. But the question is, I think there is now push from the opposition parties for the electoral frauds and also the scandals. But given that Prabowo has a very strong legitimacy, then it will be a challenge in the parliaments. So yep, this was being pushed, but it's not popularly affecting the elections. And I think the question about the military is an interesting one because Prabowo was known to have a kind of the opposition within the military. He was not a popular figure during the military because of his past. But there was some reconciliations with Prabowo's former opponents, especially the old generals, who appeared to back him, including Luhut and also I think Wiranto was in the past had a bitter relationship with Prabowo. Even Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, who was not in good terms with Prabowo, now back him and then campaign for him in East Java. So in terms of military, Indonesia's military now is different with the new order, which was highly politicized, but there is still a kind of the danger of the old military generals who can influence the military, and not only the military but also the police to take sides with Prabowo. But I think this is something that that we need to see, I think, in the future.
West Papua was the other one. Of course, West Papua, we know, is made up of number of provinces in contemporary Indonesia. But is there any change on Papua, do you think, with this new government?
So I think we might see that in terms of Papua, the militaristic approach might be taken, and it might be continued to defend Prabowo's position. I remember in the first presidential debate, he wants Indonesia to take a more militaristic approach to deal with the separatists. So the role of the military will be stronger in Papua. But this is clearly something that we need also to see whether Indonesia has the capacity to deal with that. I think now what Jokowi do is to split up the province and take the loyalties of the elder figures in Papua. So the opposition in Papua is quite weak at this time in terms of the elites. But we might see if there is something changes. I'm not sure that there will be something change. I think the patterns of the military roles in Papua could be continued.
Ben, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I might comment. I mean, obviously I'm not an expert in domestic politics, but just with my Eastern Indonesian background, I know that when Jokowi, in his first term, in other terms, the investment in the regional areas, the infrastructure investment, and the desire really to try and help the economies grow was seen very positively in Eastern Indonesia, and including in West Papua. And then I think during the term there was several incidents that happened, and I think there was tensions that occurred then, which may have changed the perception in West Papua and others of the Indonesian government. But I know early on in Jokowi's policy, he was looked very positively by Eastern Indonesia and the investment and what's going in there.
And that's perhaps declined a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. Well, there were various things that happened during.
Is there an online question?
No,
not at the moment. So we'll take another question. Just at the back here.
Yeah, thanks for having this talk. I just wanted to know, going further on the Chinese investment in nickel, is there a general difference in the patterns between Chinese investment in Indonesia compared to Australian investment?
Yeah, I mean, I think we don't have the same levels of investment in Indonesia, but the types of things that I guess where Australians see our market in terms of Indonesia oftentimes is in the METs by providing mining and engineering services to Indonesia as opposed to the actual infrastructure. So in terms of physical infrastructure, you don't see those levels. So probably don't have an equal comparison in terms of, and a lot of Australian investment too is development focused, I think, as well. Whereas China is not so much as, they do have some development projects, but a lot of it's focused on structure.
So with then a question around critical minerals, which have assumed greater policy importance. I mean, why are nickel and lithium becoming such important kind of minerals in the bilateral relation, but indeed kind of geopolitically in the relationship with China and the relationship with Australia? Well, what's the connection? Is there a connection here, decarbonisation, or
I think there's a few things going. Both Australia and Indonesia do have different critical minerals that are relevant to, I guess, the development of for batteries and electrical vehicles and so forth. So there is seen to be, ideally some synergies between the countries. So there has been various statements, and even Queensland made a statement about critical energies policy. In Western Australia, they just, I guess, to appease some of the nickel pressure, classified that as getting assistance for being critical minerals. So I do see that the future towards batteries and electric vehicles is sort of that where that's coming from. Having said that, the nickel price is quite low and the lithium price is quite low at the moment. So there is this uncertainty. We know we're moving in that direction, but how many electrical vehicles will you need in 20 years? You've got the market forces in place, even though theoretically, yes, this is all something that should be developed. Yeah,
it was seen as a synergy and complementary,
yeah.
but indeed it's not quite working
Not
out that
completely
way
no.
at the moment. There was another question from the we have an online. I'll just take the audience question, then an online question.
Thanks for this evening, both of you. I'd like to hear any thoughts on links between Indonesia and India, because they're two quote unquote rising powers, but also at the business level. Then, so any insights you might have on that would be great to hear.
Umar,
Okay, I think interestingly, so the business relationship between Indonesia and India is not as strong as China. It's, I think, partly because of the nature of the investments. India tends to be more interested to export the software, which Indonesia doesn't really. It's not substitute to Indonesia, Indonesia's products, and also secondly is that because of the diplomatic relationship is not as strong as Indonesia and China. So most of the relationship is not taken in the bilateral basis, but in the regional or multilateral basis. But I think it's now improving. So there is now connections. So some of the policies like the free school meal was inspired by India's program, and also Prabowo himself was interested to, not only Prabowo but also Joko wants to expand Indonesia's market to non-traditional partner. So, but I think still India is not among the Indonesia's biggest partner. But in the future, we might see some connections between Indonesia and India, but not as strong as Indonesia's relationship with Southeast Asian country. Simply because the orientations of India is very much strong in Western and the US-led initiatives, which Indonesia wants to take some distance from that. So yeah, there might be some improvement, but not much.
Interesting. India's emerged as a more important defence partner over the years as well. The series of ship visits, bilateral and multinational exercises, and under their look east, but it became act east policy. Southeast Asia has assumed more importance. Did you have a comment on
probably a slightly different angle. So I think sometimes I compare and contrast the relationship with India and Australia and Indonesia and Australia from a business point of view, and they're just miles apart. The Indonesian business, the Indian Business Council, I guess also maybe partly because we've had significant migration from India as well. And I know from a business, business direction point of view in terms of growth, India is seen sort of after China as the main market, whereas Indonesia still has a long way to go. So when you're looking at the two, considering we've got a neighbour, great opportunities, and India has great opportunities as well, but there is that sort of difference you see in the business focus of, if I was going to put a business development person to do work, where would I put them in Indonesia or India? That sort of way.
And where would you put them?
I would say.
I mean, certainly, I'll go to the online question. Indonesia and India were seen as the next great hopes in terms of higher education, weren't they?
Yeah.
In terms of replacing the Chinese student market. I think a lot of our universities were looking increasingly towards Jakarta and New Delhi, but it's not quite as easy to replace that market. I've got an online question.
Thank you all for the fascinating talk. This question comes from our online viewer, Penny Wensley. She was interested in hearing a little more about Gibran, the vice presidential running mate, particularly what role he might play or what policy influence or interest he might have in the future, and sort of that relationship to young people in Indonesia.
Umar, do you want to take that one?
Okay, Gibran is an interesting figure because his rise is quite meteoric in Indonesian politics in the past 3 years. He was elected as the mayor of Surakarta, Jokowi's homeland, in 2020, I think. And he was only appointed as mayor and working as mayor in 3 years. So it's quite recent. And part of the deal, I think, because Prabowo appoints Gibran as the running mate because he wants to get the endorsement of Jokowi, and he wants to ride the popularity of Jokowi for his benefits. So it is of course part of the deal, and according to surveys, Gibran's role, his young age, is playing important vital role in influencing the young voters. But the role that he might play might be related to how Jokowi and Prabowo might negotiate in the future, because clearly Gibran is not playing a very prominent role as Jokowi. Gibran still very much seen as Jokowi's son, and it might affect his relationship with Prabowo. But so far, I think we might want to see Gibran's more active role, especially as he will be tasked in development of Jakarta. So he will play a role, but his relationship.
The new capital.
The Jakarta. So the new capital will be directed by the new president. And now, if the new law on Jakarta's city province, the new law will be given to the vice president to develop Jakarta. So this might be an interesting development with Gibran.
How do you read Gibran, Ben? I mean, is he an empty vessel, or is he a chip off the old block? I mean, how do you read? He's going to be in for a challenging time with Prabowo, surely.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm not an expert again, but I've read different outcomes where they think that Jokowi will continue to have significant influence through Gibran. Others saying no, it's going to be it's separate. So yeah, I probably don't have a specific insight on his role.
You have to wonder about the longevity of that political alliance. I think Gibran is going to be in for a rough ride. I have a distinct feeling. We probably got a couple of minutes, or no? So we'll have to conclude there.
You can conclude, or I can
conclude. All right. So we've run out of time. So a very dynamic discussion, and it went all too quickly. And I think we've outlined tonight some of Indonesia's strategic importance, and we talked about, you know, foreign policy, the defence relationship, and certainly the very quick visit by our Chief of Defence Force and Miles to Jakarta after the Prabowo victory, looking to cement that cooperation. We've talked about the economic fundamentals, in essence positive, but some uncertainty ahead, particularly with the departure of Sri Mulyani. And so lots of exciting times ahead. So I'd like you to join me in thanking our panellists. Firstly, Umar, thank you very much, and then Seumahu, a terrific.
Yes, that was my role, Doctor. To thank everyone. I think it was a fantastic panel discussion, and appreciate Ben, Dr. Greta, and Dr. Umar. Thank you. And as the AIIQ tradition, the two of you will be members. She's already a member. So the two of you will be members for the next year. So you're free to come and join our meetings for the whole year. And any one of you who's not a member, I think I'll definitely invite you to become a member of AIIQ, because we have a series of events that's going to come up. And next Tuesday, same place here, we are having Professor Sahar Hameri. He's written a book on COVID lessons learned from Queensland specifically. I think the book was released today. So he's going to officially come and launch the book again. So welcome you to join us next Tuesday in the same place, which is the 12th of March. And again, on the 26th, we got our other Professor Caitlin Byrne, who used to be part of us. So she's going to be talking with Susan Harris-Rimmer from Griffith as part of the climate politics in Oceania. So renewing Australia-Pacific relations in a warming world. It's in the warming world. So that's going to be another interesting topic that will happen on the 26th of March. And again, we have continuous 3 events in April again. So the first one on the 9th of April, which is a joint session with the Griffith Asia Institute. So it's going to be a discussion with Graham, a discussion of the Griffith Asia Pacific strategic outlook. So they're going to have 3 or 4 people coming in and talking about various topics. It's going to be bang, bang, 10 minutes each, and it's going to be really good. So again, welcome you to come for that. And the most interesting thing will be on the 16th of April, where we are having His Excellency Darius Degutis. He's the ambassador for Lithuania and Australia. So he's going to be coming and talking to us. So again, interesting things happening. So that's why we keep saying, become a member, join the place. And on the 23rd of April, we got Dr. Michael Vaughan talking about a blossoming alliance, Australia and Japanese foreign relations. So it's a lot of events that are coming up in the next probably 6-7 weeks. So it's jam-packed, and thanks to Graham again for doing a lot of work. So thanks everyone for joining in, and have a great night, and see you all next week. Thank you.